So startups usually don't have huge amounts of money. They don't have the big corporate budgets for PR. But I believe that with a little bit of guidance, no money is no problem when it comes to PR for startups. It's something that I believe that startups can really do on their own, up to a certain stage at least. And I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to actually achieve that. One way is obviously to come to a program like this. So getting started, how to write a great press kit. Now we talked about how PR is not all about the press kit, but this is really the basic element of PR. I think it's what most people understand when they think about public relations. So first thing we'll do is talk about the press kit. What is it? How do you write one? So at the core of a press kit is the press release, of course. A press release you've probably all heard of. It's an announcement sent out to the press to let the public know of company developments. Okay, so it's a news item, a news piece about your company that talks about your company, talks about press developments, and the ultimate aim is to get this published in the press. Types of press releases. Really, any update that your company has is a potential opportunity for getting some press coverage. You're not going to get featured in a major top-tier global publication every single time. However, almost any company announcement has the potential to get picked up by the press, even if it's just locally in one of the startup blogs. And again, I will be sharing this with you, so the slides that is, so you will have this as a resource after the presentation as well. So here's a few tips for your press release. A press release should always announce something new. You're announcing an actual news item. PR can go beyond the press release. You can write feature articles and get publication in other ways. But when you're talking about a press kit and a press release, it should always announce something new. It's not an advertisement, so don't oversell your product or your company. It should be factual. Writers will often add their own opinion about your service or your news update, but ultimately your press release should be factual. If it's not factual, if it has a lot of opinion, if you're trying to oversell, it's not convincing for writers. Don't use a lot of technical jargon or technical language in your press release. It should be simple and easy for writers who may not know, who may not understand the technology. Should be easy for them to understand it. Limit yourself to one subject. So don't include 5 different news items in a single press release. If you're talking about your product launch, just talk about that. Don't talk about how you're launching a new product and you're opening an office in San Francisco and you just raised some investment. That's too many stories, and in fact it's much better to break those stories up over the course of, say, a few months and try to get publication for each one. And important as well to keep your press release short. Around 1 page is a good length. You certainly don't want to write more than about 1.5 pages. A press release is really a teaser for writers to understand about your company, understand what your news item is, and then create their own interesting article based on that. So basic elements of a press release. Obviously, you start with a strong headline. If you're sending out your press release by email, your headline is incredibly important. Your subject line will determine whether or not a writer actually opens your email. This is critically important. Many PR professionals will write many email subject lines and then choose the best one. This is really important. Many writers get flooded with press releases. So if your subject line is not strong, there's a very good chance that they won't even open your email. The body of your press release will talk about the news item that you're trying to get published. Important to put quotes. Quotes from your CEO are good. Quotes from, if you're talking about a new partnership that you've formed with Naver, for example, or Kakao, it's good to get a quote from that partner as well. The higher level the quotes are, the better. So try to get a quote from the CEO level or senior level. Below your press release, it's a good idea to include a boilerplate, which is a few sentences. We'll explain this later as well. But a boilerplate is a few sentences which normally comes at the end of the press release, which gives some very high-level information about your company. So explains very briefly about where your company is from, when you were founded, what your service is, and provides contact information in case a writer wants to get back in touch with you for further information or an interview. So that's the press release. Moving on to the boilerplate. The boilerplate, again, is something that comes at the end of the press release. It's a standard piece of writing that can be reused over and over again. So obviously every press release will be a new news item, but the boilerplate is pretty much standard. You should keep it up to date, which maybe means modifying it every 6 months or a year, but ultimately it's a short piece of writing that you can use very effectively in a press release and in other ways, and we'll come on to that in a second. And again, boilerplates should be kept very short, down to around 100 to 150 words. So everything in your press release should be quite short, quite succinct, very clear. So here's an example of a boilerplate. This is one that I wrote up for G3 Partners. You can see that it's 125 words, so it's quite short, and has all the key elements. So at the top, we've got the year that G3 Partners was founded, obviously the company name, what we do very briefly and where we're based, what our services are, regional and global PR services for tech startups in Asia. Also talks about our target customers, which is important. And then briefly outlines a few of our key achievements, helping startups getting featured on Tier 1 global publications, helping companies raise money on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. It's a good idea to include brand names that people will recognize. So Kickstarter and Indiegogo, we have Forbes, TechCrunch, Mashable, Tech in Asia. It's a good idea to add these names because associating your brand with big global brands, will help to improve the profile of your own company. And then very briefly, geographically where we operate, where our offices, and then finally at the bottom, giving links where people can find more information about your company and an email address to follow up with if writers want to get back in touch. So this is basically the perfect boilerplate. So there's an example for you, which you can use yourselves. Now, the boilerplate is a very effective piece of writing. Again, it comes at the end of a press release, but it can be used in many other situations. Your boilerplate acts as a very effective elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is usually around 30 seconds or so, and gives very high-level basic information about your company and your service, and helps to open a conversation. So if you consider this, the information in the boilerplate acts as a very effective elevator pitch as well. The boilerplate, parts of the boilerplate can also be used as company profiles on platforms like LinkedIn, Crunchbase, even in the App Store or Google Play. If you get your boilerplate done professionally, it can be used to describe your product or service. Can be used in marketing materials, and even on Facebook and Twitter. So there's a lot of different places that you can use the boilerplate. Also acts as a very good introduction to be included in emails if you're reaching out to new partners or corporate clients. So even though the boilerplate is typically associated with a press release, it has a lot of other uses. Now, we are actually creating a boilerplate for everybody in this program. So as well as the templates, we're actually providing you with a personalized boilerplate for your company. So also in the press release, press kit, very important to include images. A picture tells 1,000 words, as we all know. And without images in your press kit, your press release could be ignored. Most publications will only publish articles when they have images. So even if your press release is fantastic, even if your outreach email is great, your press release may not get published if you don't include images. So what types of images are good to include? Obviously a high resolution version of your company logo. Maybe if you've got a product or service logo as well, you should include that. 1 or 2 images of your product or service. So if it's a mobile app, you want to include a couple of screenshots perhaps. If you are creating a robot for kids, obviously it's a very visual product. You want to include images of that. Startups have personality as well. So including images of your CEO and your team in their natural environment, looking casual with a smile on their face. Again, it helps to add personality to your brand, and you can include these in your press kit as well. And finally, a very short, relevant video is also a good thing to link to in your press kit. So it's not essential, but if you have one that very clearly and concisely demonstrates what your product or service is, it's a good idea to link it in your press kit. So here's a few sample images. These two here at the top left. So this is obviously a design-focused app-based company. You can see they have screenshots of their actual application, and they've also added these characters in the background. I think this is very smart because as well as showing what the service actually does, they're giving their company a bit of personality. You can see that they're very creative people, very colorful, and I think these images really portray what the product or service is, but also gives some idea of the character of the company. The images in the middle, again, very descriptive, demonstrates what the product or service is. CEO photos, you don't want to include a passport style photo in your press kit. Passport style photos, they're incredibly boring. I think in most cases, you don't want to include images of people wearing a suit either, because the suit style is not really the startup style. So these two pictures here capture the personality of the CEO. This one here of Mark Zuckerberg is also very effective because as well as showing a picture of the CEO looking active, you've also got the logo in there. And then bottom left, good example of how you can demonstrate your product workflow using quite basic images. And again, this helps readers to understand more about your product or service. So once you've created your fantastic press kit, which will include your press release, your boilerplate, some images, and you've sculpted your perfect outreach email, what next? Getting published is the next big struggle that startups face. We're going to help you with that, obviously, by providing you with an initial press list. But how do you actually go about getting published on these top-tier blogs? First area to start with is obviously to have a press list. Now, I mentioned before, there was a question about it in the first session. Building a press list can start today. Even if you're not ready to launch any news, to get publication today, it's a very good idea to start building your press relationships early on. So how do you go about building a press list? First thing is to identify a small number of target publications where you want to get published. Okay, so if you're a startup in Seoul and you're operating in Asia and you've just launched your service in Korea and Japan, you're not going to get featured on the New York Times. Not going to happen. Okay, so be realistic. You know, where are your target customers? What do you actually want to achieve? Start with publications that are relevant to your business. Then identify writers within those publications that cover your beat. Writers, in most cases, will have specific topics that they cover, and many of the other topics they will not. So if a writer generally covers social media, then there's no point reaching out to them about your new hardware product, for example. So once you've identified target publications, try to identify 2 or 3 writers in each one which regularly cover your industry or your beat. Record contact information. Many publications will actually have the writer's email address either at the bottom of the article or in their writer profile on the website. If not, you can connect with them on LinkedIn, Facebook in some cases, but be careful, many people still use Facebook as a social media platform. So you want to be a bit careful there. Twitter is also a good way to connect with writers. Building a writer profile. Having a few short lines about what the writer does will help you to organize your press list later on. At the beginning, you might only start with maybe 10 to 20 contacts, but over time, over a number of years, you might end up with hundreds of contacts, and you want to organize those contacts so that when you have a press release, it's easy to identify the writers that you want to reach out for that specific press release. And I guess something key to remember for a startup, you want to build relationships with writers. So your press list is called a list, but if you see it as a collection of personal relationships instead of just a list of email addresses on an Excel, it'll help you improve the effectiveness of your press outreach. So writers are just like everybody else. They value personal relationships. If you put some time in to really get to know them, you will see better results, especially if they are relevant to your business, if they cover your beat. And I'll show a good example of this later on. So we mentioned that getting onto TechCrunch is almost like a rite of passage for startups. This is actually the same example as from my previous slide deck, so we won't spend too much time on this, but essentially Catherine Shu is one of only 2 writers from TechCrunch that cover the whole of East Asia from, I guess, from India all the way through to Japan. Now, for 2 writers to cover that entire region, it's basically impossible. These writers are incredibly busy. They get hundreds of emails every day from startups who want to get published on TechCrunch. So sticking with it, don't give up. If you don't get a response from a writer the first time, it doesn't mean they don't like your company or they don't like you. Maybe they're not interested in your press release. That's fine. But if you don't get a response from a writer, don't give up. Feel free to send through, maybe one follow-up email a couple of days later. Maybe send them a reminder on Twitter. That's fine. And if you still don't get a response, don't worry. Even in PR, even as PR professionals, I think we probably only get a response rate of 50% or less even to our emails. So it's just part of the process. Feel free to reach out to the writers again in a few months when you have a new news story. And as I mentioned before, it took me 6 months to get CloudIke featured on TechCrunch. And it was only after several emails, several interactions on social media, and then finally I was able to actually connect them in San Francisco. So keep at it. Now, I think that if my first approach would have been about meeting in San Francisco, there's a very good chance that that meeting wouldn't have happened and the coverage wouldn't have happened either. So I think that this pre-work that I did over 6 months definitely contributed to the final article that was published. So that's the best way to get featured on TechCrunch, I think. Either that or raise $10 million. So, contacting journalists. Very important part of your PR success. Journalists, especially journalists at the bigger publications, are flooded. So trying to get noticed is very difficult. Spamming is not the right way to go, okay? So spam is a tasty treat. It's not something that you should do to journalists, okay? Spamming journalists is not a good idea. Do not include everybody in the same email. It will definitely come across as spam. Remember, writers, what they do as their career is write. So if you're sending through bulk emails to hundreds of journalists, they will definitely spot that it's a bulk email and they'll ignore it. It's actually kind of insulting to do that. So your press outreach should be on a one-to-one basis. And even if you have a press list with hundreds of writers in it, I can guarantee that your success rates will be higher if you approach 10 journalists who are relevant on a one-to-one basis than sending out a bulk email to everyone. It may seem counterintuitive that reaching out to 200 writers should be more effective than reaching out to 10, but it's really not the case. And I know because I've made that mistake myself. And we spoke a little bit before about building a relationship with writer. So again, how do you actually do this in a practical way? Well, the best way is to add value to their work. Writers will cover a specific beat. Writers like it if you make their life easy. So if you send through a really great, well-written press release, if you send through a targeted email that's relevant to them, if you make it easy for them to publish an article by including good images, by including links through to your product or service, your video, this makes their work much easier. And if they can, they usually have targets of publishing several articles every day. If they can receive your press kit and publish a good article in 30 minutes, it's obviously much much better for them than if they have to spend hours on your press release. So think about making their job easy. Other ways, offer source material. There's nothing wrong with approaching a writer from time to time, maybe once a month, once a quarter even, offering to provide, to be a source for an article they're writing. Again, if the writer covers your beat, it's likely that you will have useful information that can help them write better articles and write articles more quickly. And at G3, writers often contact us for sources. So for example, they might be writing an article about the best hardware startups in Korea. They know that we know hardware startups, and so we can offer sources for their articles. And of course, where we can, we try to include our clients in those articles. So same thing for you. If you build relationships with relevant writers, the best situation is that they actually approach you because they know that you're an expert in your industry. Buy them a beer, buy them a coffee. Find out where their office is. If you're near their office one day, just meet up for a coffee. It's going to cost you almost nothing, and it's not an opportunity to sell your company to them, to sell your next story. But if you build this coffee relationship with them, they're much more likely to approach you if they're looking for sources for an article, and they're much more likely to publish your press release when you actually send one through. Now, if all of your target writers are in San Francisco, it makes it very difficult. But if you are traveling overseas, that's a great opportunity to build relationships with writers around the world as well. And writers do love human interaction as well. So if you ask, to meet up for a coffee, make sure that you give them a good reason to meet up with you. Maybe you have some industry insight you like to talk to them about. So make it interesting and relevant. But in many cases, writers will be very happy to meet up with you in person. So here's an example of how building a relationship with writers, connecting with them on social media, can help your PR efforts. You can actually see that this message was published last night at 11 o'clock. So this is very, very relevant. Now, Jeff Quigley is a writer at Tech in Asia. He's based in Tokyo. He's covering both Japan and Korea for Tech in Asia. He's very active, very good guy. He comes to Korea relatively often, loves meeting up with startups in person. And this is what he published last night on Facebook. So this is an open invitation to any startup founders with global ambitions to talk about their business at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. So this is a writer, an influential writer in Asia, who's inviting you to come and speak about your business in public. And what's very likely as well is that he'll be at the event. You can have a chat with him in person, and there's a strong likelihood that he'll also write an article about your company. Now, for Korean startups, it's not feasible because he's in Tokyo and you're here. But this is an example of how connecting with writers on social media can give you really genuine, fantastic press opportunities. And there's writers in Korea that you can connect with. I've seen similar postings like this in the past as well. So here's a list of do's and don'ts. We don't need to go through all of them right now. Again, we'll be sharing this presentation with you afterwards, so you can go through this list. A few things to cover. Target relevant writers. If the writer has never written an article about hardware, there's no point sending an email to him about your hardware startup. Writers are individuals. Not everybody likes to receive press kits in exactly the same way. For example, some writers like to receive their press kit as a PDF. Some writers like to receive it as a Word doc, or they want to have it uploaded to Google Docs. If you're not sure, there's nothing wrong with sending a quick email through to a writer saying, you know, we've got a press release coming out next week. Do you have any tips on how you'd like to receive it? They may not get back, but if they do, and then you follow their preferences, they'll probably remember it, and it will increase your chances of success. We talked about not spamming journalists, but sending 1 or 2 reminders is absolutely fine. Don't demand coverage, because it's not their job to give you free PR, but sending 1 or 2 quick reminders is not a problem. Very important, this one here. Show appreciation and keep the dialogue going. So if a writer does publish your article, make sure that you share it on social media. Tweet it out every single week for 3 months, for example, and include the writer's hashtag. They will certainly spot it at some point in that time, and they'll appreciate that you're helping them share their work. Share it on your Facebook page as well. Become friends with them, and then, again, tag them in the post. They'll appreciate that you're helping to promote their work. Send them a quick email and suggest meeting up for a coffee or beer to say thank you for the coverage. Again, simple things that can help build that long-term relationship. And again, finally, don't mistake no for never. Don't mistake a no response for an I don't care about your startup, okay? When you're starting out with PR, it's quite likely that 70, 80, 90% of your emails will go unanswered. That doesn't mean the writers don't like you. Doesn't mean they don't care about your story. Maybe it wasn't written in the right way. Maybe your subject headline wasn't powerful enough. Maybe you forgot to include your images or something. Don't worry, just try again the next time. Final thing, I think that this is quite relevant to startup PR. Many of you here might be at this bottom step. I won't do it, it's not important. Building a product is much more important. If I build a great product, people will buy it. Many startups we speak to are on this first step. Then they start thinking about it a little bit more, and they say, oh, well, I can't do it. PR can only be done by PR professionals and fantastic PR companies like G3 Partners. That's not true. You can do it. Start with the basics. You're all based in Korea. You probably know Be Success, Platinum, Venture Square. They're all startup-focused tech blogs here in Korea, and many of them, there's writers who would love to speak to you. Again, don't go for the New York Times as your first hit. You won't succeed. Start with the local blogs. Build your experience. Build your writer relationships. And after some trial and error, maybe after a little bit of support, after some practice, you will definitely achieve PR success if you just keep at it. Okay, so that concludes our second session. Again, hopefully this will give you all of the basics, practical steps that you need to take to achieve PR success, and we'll open it up again for questions. So if there's any questions you have about how to create a press kit, how to build relationships with writers, how to improve your PR success, or if you want specific examples of how we've helped clients, now's the time to ask. Any questions? Must have been a pretty good presentation in that case. All the questions are answered. Okay. Yeah, we've got a couple of examples. We've got this one actually on the slide deck. This is one that Eric pointed out to me. Very cool example of how this guy hustled his startup PR and had a fantastic result. He didn't hire an agency. He didn't have experience in PR. He just thought creatively, and the result was quite spectacular. So essentially, he was lying in a hospital bed. He not a serious illness, but he basically had some time to think about where he was in his life, and he realized that he wasn't in his ideal job, and he wanted a change. So lying in his hospital bed, he was thinking about, what do I really want to do? And what he really wanted to do was look after people's dogs. He wanted to be a dog walker. Now, this is not something that he'd done before. So he thought about, how can I kickstart my business very cheaply, very quickly? And this is what he came up with. He's based in New York. Now, I'm sure that you all know New York as being a fashion capital. This guy would stick out like a sore thumb. Dressed like this, you don't see many people in New York dressed like this, especially not walking around with dogs. So he came up with an interesting idea to give his company and himself a very unique personality. He wanted people to look at him and be persuaded that this is the guy that they want to have look after their dog. And if you look at it, he's completely kitted out. He's obviously incredibly passionate about protecting, helping dogs and dog owners. This is a guy that you would trust. And so he got a few of his friends together. They dressed up like this, and they just walked around Central Park for one day, walking dogs. And by the end of the first day, he got 5 customers. So within one day, at basically no cost, he kickstarted his new business. And I think this is a great example of startup hustle. You know, it's not always about lots and lots of planning. It's not about paying a large fee to a PR company. It's about thinking creatively and seeing what you can do with the resources you have. So that's one example of how one startup kickstarted their business in a single day at almost no cost and acquired their first customers. The other example that Eric highlighted is it's a company called Let's See Beer. Is that their company or product name? So the company is Let's See. They've just launched their first application, which is an application called Let's See Beer. Basically, it's a kind of virtual reality mobile app. You scan any beer bottle, and it will come up with a review of the beer, and will give you more information about the beer. So it'll have tasting notes. And it's basically to help people choose a beer before they pay for it. So this company approached us. They wanted some support with their launch. So we organized a very small media event. We'd actually only had this project confirmed 3 days before they wanted the project completed. So we had 3 days to work with. We invited a small group of journalists. 3 or 4 turned up to a bar in Itaewon, obviously, which is a good place if you're discovering a beer app. It was a bottle beer bar. Invited the journalists down there. We spent 2 or 3 hours drinking beer and talking with journalists and trying out the app. And the result was spectacular. So Elaine Ramirez, who is a Tech in Asia writer, was one of the journalists who came to the event, and I believe she was the only one that actually published as a result of that event. Is that right, Eric?
Elaine published because of the event, but then there were a lot of hiccups because of what she wrote and because of our press release.
Yeah, so we organized a small event, invited a couple of writers. Elaine Ramirez from Tech in Asia attended the event and did an interview with the CEO, took some pictures, and published an article. And as a result of that one article, there were around 15 other pickups from other major publications across the world, including
Mashable, Yahoo News, a whole list of international media picked this up, including a lot of gear-related media as well. It was picked up in English, Spanish, French, and German as well. So it really had a global impact, not just Korea, not just Asia-wide, but worldwide. As a result of those articles, as a result of that media, they've been getting between 7,000 and 10,000 downloads per week of their app since the initial article came out. So it went from a very, very small event to reporters seeing that, checking out the press release as well, and then also people reading it and responding by downloading. Yeah, so it's been very successful, and the total project cost on that, I'd say including the happy hour for the journalist, was probably like 350만 won, something like that. And if you look at that, if it's gotten them about 25,000 downloads or more already, that's a very cheap way of reaching out and getting downloads. It takes some work, it takes some planning, it takes a little bit of luck, but it really is quite effective. Now, it's not completely rosy, though. They went out a little bit earlier than they should have. They were being pushed because of an external deadline for a grant they received. And they went out a little bit too early, so they've gotten a little bit of negative feedback based on that. However, at the same time, it shows that if the timing were just slightly better, it would be a resounding success story. As it is, it's already quite a big success story. How to do startup PR?
Did this presentation answer some of your questions? Yeah? Okay. Do any of you have, are you at a stage now or within the next few weeks or months where you think that you'll be doing some outreach? Maybe we can go through one case study with you and provide some advice on what you could do. Anyone got a press release coming up soon? None of you have any news coming up? Yep. You can?
There is no exact guarantee that, even though I spend all of my time with those press release people, that my Millard team or some of the exposure will go up. There's no guarantee at all.
No, there's no guarantee whatsoever. Marketing is something that you pay for. PR is something that you pray for. And it's very true. There is no guarantee that you'll get PR success. I mean, we have a relationship with Hangyang. We've actually prepaid for a number of posts on Hangyang, so we can guarantee that. But it's unusual, and paid coverage is usually not going to be as valuable as organic. So yeah, I mean it's a good point. Now, if you're working with a good PR agency, they'll hopefully be very honest with you, and if you don't have a story, hopefully they'll be honest with you and say, look, we don't think you're ready. Maybe you can try a few free things yourself to get this story published, but there's no point paying us now because we're not confident we can get your story published in your target publications. So that's the first thing. But beyond that, where a PR company can help is, first of all, being able to write a very convincing, powerful press release and boilerplate. Without those things, you won't get published anyway. And the second thing that a PR company has is a huge press release, a huge press list, and a lot of personal relationships with writers. So we've been working with tech writers for years, and even if we haven't met them in person, we're aware of what they cover, we're aware of their preferences, and we'll be able to target the relevant writers probably more effective than most startups. So yeah, you're right. PR is not guaranteed, but there's ways that you can increase your yeah.
Just to add as well onto combination of what they both mentioned, why, if there's no guarantee, why put all that energy and effort in? It's simple. PR is sort of official, it's formal, and because it's formal, it's an endorsement. So if you are, it's like getting a good university degree. It's simply an endorsement of who and what you are. So if you pay for your marketing, if you pay for your media, you can be guaranteed of a lot of exposure. But that exposure is not necessarily a stamp that certifies what you are marketing is real and true. However, if you are published in media that is recognized as having integrity, people tend to take it more seriously. The people who matter the most, such as, especially if you're B2B, they will take it more seriously. Your investors will take it more seriously. That in turn will get you additional exposure with your consumers if you are targeting general consumers. So hence, make use of G3 services, put that extra effort in so that even though there's no guarantee, at least during this program you know that you'll be able to get the highest probability of getting the kind of quality PR exposure that you really, really need to push your company forward into next year. You won't see results immediately, but there's always a bit of a delay of 1 to 6 months to really experience the value of your PR.
Yeah, so the call to action that we're probably going to end on here before we hopefully get some food delivered is that we're going to be asking you for various things about your company over the next few months. Please help us help you. Please give us the information so that we can do the outreach that will get you into the media and that will get you the exposure and that will ultimately help your company grow. It's free of charge thanks to a generous grant from KeySed. So please take advantage of it. The more active you are in reaching out for it, the more we'll be able to help you, so you'll get more value than the startups who do not actively seek that help.
Quite simply, if you don't let us know about up and coming stories, or if you don't provide the information, we won't be able to get you coverage. So yeah, make sure that you do respond to that, and we'll yeah. Yeah.
We'll be working on the online and viral aspects of the promotions.
So we will break off for lunch now. We've got some pizza coming in the next few minutes. After lunch, we have time for some one-on-one PR sessions with you. So feel free to stay behind after lunch, and we can have a 30-minute chat with you if you have any specific questions for our team. So Eric is obviously, he's been up on stage. Sejong will also be here, and I will as well. So feel free to stay behind, connect with us, and we're happy to have a one-on-one chat with you. And I'd like to hand over now to Chris then.
네, 지금 들으신 것처럼 여러분들 그 회사에 대한 정보를 주시는 게 가장 중요하고요. 그 다음에 어떤 생각하던 방향을 지금 여기 PR G3 파트너스나 아프로벤처스하고 이제 맞춰 나가는 과정이 제일 중요합니다. 그래서 오늘 오신 분들은 그래도 이제 할 텐데 이 비디오는 전부 지금 안 오신 분들한테도 배포가 될 거고요. 저희가 왜 스타트업 미디어 전문 회사를 선정을 했냐면은 다른 PR 컴퍼니들은 대기업이나 좀 큰 중견기업들 위주로 되기 때문에 전혀 차원이 다릅니다. 스타트업들이 접근할 수 없는 부분이고요. 다만 이제 저희가 PR하고 마케팅하고는 약간 구분을 해서 하는데 저희가 지금 아주 빠듯한 예산으로 올해 50팀에 대해서 전체적인 지원을 하고 있습니다. 하시다 보면은 이제 저희의 기본 목표는 내년 1월 말까지 기본적으로 PR 저희가 뭐 개별 기업당 1개, 뭐 석세스 스토리, 블로깅 이제 여러 가지가 있고요. 그게 가는 게 목적이고 사실 마케팅까지는 아닙니다. 마케팅은 이제 PR 이 컨설팅을 받다 보면은 필요하신 부분을 느끼실 거예요. 마케팅 부분에 대한 거는 이제 역시 예산이 많이 들어가기 때문에 개별적으로 기업에서 자금이 가능하다면 하셔도 좋지만 내년에 저희가 마케팅 쪽 지원하는 프로그램도 지금 설계 중에 있으니까 한번 그때 확인하시고 그걸 활용하시는 것도 한 가지 방법입니다. 그래서 그렇게 적절히 활용하시고 그 다음에 아까 제가 말씀드렸지만 오픈 마인드로 아까 그 렛츠 비어 같은 것처럼 판을 가지고 하다 보면 또 굉장히 많이 뜬다고 그러죠. 뜨는 경우도 있기 때문에 회사 특성을 갖다 잘 설명을 해주시고 오후에 그 1대1 상담을 임해 주셨으면 되겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Chris. Right, we'll break up for lunch then. Thank you.